What is going on YouTube? This is Ask the Root. So I'm going to review the 8th album by Marilyn Manson. Basically, this album is called Born Villain, and it came out in the spring of 2012. Now, this was kind of seen as a return to form for Marilyn Manson, just because after a couple of not necessarily bunk albums, but just not really critically received albums like The High End of Low and Eat Me, Drink Me, it kind of felt like Marilyn Manson. And they also hadn't been around before that since 2003 with the Golden Age of Grotesque. So it had really been since the early 2000s since Marilyn Manson was kind of more in their heyday and such. Now, back in 2015 and early 2016, I reviewed Marilyn Manson's 2007 2009 albums. I want to say I gave both those albums 10s out of 10, but I want to say I gave both those albums 10s out of 10, but I kind of look after it nowadays. I don't listen to those albums as much as I did like 6, 7, 8 years ago, but I do have to say that they are pretty decently stellar, I would have to say. But this album is not going to get a rave score like I gave previous Marilyn Manson albums in the past, but it is good. It is worth the purchase. It's just not like the tumultuous kind of victory that I was used to for Marilyn Manson. And it's just, as tastes evolve with rock music, it's not to say this is a bad project. It's just is kind of the fact that now that I have more formatting towards seeing like the singles, because when I reviewed like Eat Me, Drink Me back in 2015, I didn't really realize what the singles were for Marilyn Manson and that type of stuff. But just looking after it, just being able to say, like, I do realize the singles and kind of more of the snappier songs on here. There is some lengthier songs on here that Marilyn Manson kind of takes some pages out of like Nine Inch Nails and Depeche Mode's Playbook, some of those kind of 80s and early 90s metal type sludge records as far as that kind of goes. And I do like Depeche Mode. I'm going to eventually review them. Alice Cooper, Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails, some of those type folks. They are pretty good, but I kind of feel like some of the kind of style, some of these more sprawling songs, I kind of was looking for Marilyn Manson, because this is a more rescinded Marilyn Manson. It's not quite the ferociousness of songs like The Beautiful People or Fight Song or some of those type songs, or Mob Scene from like the early 2000s and late 90s. And that was kind of, I kind of felt like this would have been like seeing 2010s Marilyn Manson would have been interesting to kind of have that, but it's just a lot more relaxed and a lot more looming and kind of ominous more so than that. And it works for like a haunting pitch, but in terms of the energy, there's not really a ton of snappy kind of songs on here with that ferocious bite of songs like Antichrist, with albums like Antichrist Superstar and Hollywood and Golden Age of Grotesque and some of those particular ones. I just would have to say it's a compact album, and I can see how folks would say this is a very return to form, just because it is a haunting and the aesthetic is pretty on point with this particular project. But I just look after it just being able to say that it's just it has a very minimal promotion. I would say just 2 short singles in addition to a couple other like kind of crafted singles, at least in that format, that tried to help bolster the project. But it's just, a lot of this is just kind of filler compared to some of the stuff. Marilyn Manson, it's kind of like Snoop Dogg and Eminem, where they just kind of have like more of like a kind of drawn out kind of catalog, not drawn out in a bad way, but just they have a more extensive catalog to where they don't have to have complete albums every time around, because they've been around for, like, by that point, just approximately 20 years. That's just kind of the thing as far as that kind of goes. But I look after it. So there were 2 singles from this project. The first single was No Reflection. So No Reflection is a glaring evening bop. It's a very vanilla rock single, and it's somewhat mellow for Marilyn Manson. I kind of feel like this one kind of has a pretty good emphasis. I can see this being a return to form when folks thought that Marilyn Manson was kind of in a slump. Like I said, it's been a while since I've listened to their 2007, 2009 albums, but considering that Marilyn Manson, from what folks had kind of said, had not had a hit single since like 2003 or so, with Mob Scene and some of those singles from Golden Age Grotesque and like Hollywood and some of those moments, and Personal Jesus off of their Greatest Hits album from 2004. I kind of feel like, and Wikipedia had said that this was their highest charting song. No Reflection was their highest charting song since Personal Jesus from 2004. But I kind of look after it like I feel like this can be a return to form. This is definitely just a stock. Compared to stuff, because I know Marilyn Manson so well, this is just a very vanilla rock single. This is not, I don't think that this is in like top 5 or top 10 of best Marilyn Manson songs. I would definitely have to say it's good, but it's just stock. This is kind of like a song that you would hear from Eminem, like off of Encore, or Snoop Dogg off of like From the Church to the Palace from 2002, something like that. Not From the Church to the Palace is like a single by Snoop Dogg, but just one of those singles by Snoop Dogg off of like his 2002 album, Paid the Cost to Be the Boss. That's what I'm talking about. Just some of that, where this is just kind of like a very stock factory made kind of Marilyn Manson song. I think folks would probably like it and say that this is not a bad Marilyn Manson song, but this is not quite as ferocious as he normally is. It's just more mellow and kind of has like a more kind of just resonant and kind of sedate kind of format for him, where it's a good rock single. And definitely, if you haven't heard Marilyn Manson before, you would probably think this is a pretty feral kind of one, but it's just relatively, I mean, it's kind of glaring, kind of a little bit shrill, just as far as that kind of goes. The aesthetic is real good for it, but I just look at the concept, it just is not quite as, it's not the most ravenous of Marilyn Manson songs. It's really vanilla for him. I feel like that's a good one. But the second single is Slow Motion, and this is like, it's kind of surprising that the promotion wrapped up so quickly for this project, because I really felt like there could have been further singles on here that would have promoted this particular project. I mean, especially considering that Marilyn Manson had been gone since 2009. It just was kind of such a sedate kind of comeback for him. Just kind of interesting, just the format of the fact that he didn't try to push this project more, because I think he could have had a few more prime years. This could have really revitalized like Marilyn Manson in the 2010s, because he was quieter in this decade. I mean, he did stuff, but it was just kind of more off to the wayside as far as that kind of went. This was kind of more secondary, almost tertiary kind of valves as far. I mean, he had the singles in the 2010s, but they just kind of felt not quite as ferocious between like 1994 and 2003 as far as that kind of went. But it is kind of a good, both these singles are pretty good. I mean, I feel like No Reflection is more vanilla, but Slow Motion, this is a decadent and kind of ritzy rock single fit for nightclubs, and this is more groomed. This is more blue blood and groomed. I feel like this is the sort of song that you'd hear in like a Quentin Tarantino movie, something like that, something just around casinos and those type places, just ritzier places where you'd have a little bit more fancy and updrift as far as dressing and those sort of things. Just places with the dress code, kind of like the concept of getting this. When I think of Marilyn Manson, I don't always think of like rock singles where they would be in nightclubs and that type of stuff, but this is definitely one that just feels a lot more blue blood like and a lot more flashy a stepping of a song. And I do like the concept of getting that Slow Motion one, where I feel like No Reflection is kind of more of just like the rock single that you'd play. Just, it's almost makeshift, just kind of in a haunting sense. It's just very stock, something that you could have heard on the radio, just something in like a haunting September, October, something like that. But it just kind of, I mean, I feel like it just didn't have the longevity of typical Marilyn Manson singles, but it is good, just like in a sense, if you just need to like remember what Marilyn Manson is kind of about, just kind of a reminder in that sort of sense as far as that kind of goes. But it just doesn't have the longevity, but it is solid enough. Just kind of, you know, it's just stock Marilyn Manson. But Slow Motion is probably the better single, I would say, but that one's just a lot more ritzy. So this, you know, if you're looking for something like Fight Song, or if you're looking for something like The Beautiful People, if you're looking for something like the Disposable Teens or something like that, some of those type songs, it doesn't really have like a sheer number one kind of single. This album doesn't have like a sheer number one kind of single in terms of that craziness, but I do like the concept of some stuff on here, so we're going to get to that. Like, there's 14 songs on this album, and out of those 14, I'm going to recommend 6. So it's kind of trite almost, but I do feel like the thing about these songs is they're good ones. I still feel like, despite the fact that I'm only recommending 6 songs, I still would have to recommend purchasing. Despite the fact that there's only 6 songs out of 14 I recommend, I still feel like these are recommendable enough to still make a purchase for the album, just because they're kind of ones that are just original enough and just kind of have the context of like some new juices and vibes. I just feel like the concept of it is still worth checking out, despite the fact that this is kind of somewhat of a lacking album. So the 6 songs I recommend would be No Reflection, Slow Motion, You're So Vain, Hey Cruel World, Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day, and Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms. So, Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day is a similar song to The Beautiful People. This is a cagey, uptight riffs kind of song, and it's very raucous. This is the sort of crazy Marilyn Manson I think could have definitely stood to have been on here a lot more. Pretty much, I would say, damn near the craziest song on the album. This is definitely something, this is a snappy kind of song. It's just a little over 4 minutes. I like the concept of getting this one. If you do miss that 90s and early 2000s energy by Marilyn Manson, this is a vintage one, but it just feels so out of place considering that most of the stuff is kind of more sprawling and just kind of like looming kind of sludge as far as that kind of goes. Hey Cruel World is kind of another one that kind of has a little bit of snappy energy. This one had a music video for it. This is kind of like a pseudo single. Sometimes Marilyn Manson will drop singles, like he did that with Heaven Upside Down when he had Johnny Depp in one of the music videos. But Hey Cruel World is like a simmering, haunting evening music of a song. Hey Cruel World is a simmering, haunting evening music of a song. It's pretty dope. It shifts into like fight song like territory, I would have to say. So this is another one that kind of has that cagey sort of sense. It's really like Marilyn Manson shouts like fight in the song like he did in that song. So it just kind of has that particular energy as far as getting some of that. Just kind of another, this one's pretty crazy. I do like the concept. This is exactly the concept as to why Marilyn Manson needed more songs like this. I mean, I know it's not, I know that probably there need to be more tricks as far as that kind of went, but I just kind of feel like the concepts of like this album was just lengthier than what it probably needed to be for the sheer amount of songs that just didn't have that sort of bite. Because even the singles, like the two singles I listed, are not like fight music. Like even the two singles I listed are not fight song like Hey Cruel World is, and Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day. So it's just kind of, you have to turn to the album cuts to get some of the more ravenous energy. But another hit valve that Marilyn Manson usually nails pretty well, and they've been able to continue that trend, is "You're So Vain." This cover song is a Carly Simon cover. I think that's like a song from the 70s. It says it features Johnny Depp in here. I didn't see that featuring Johnny Depp, but I didn't really understand where that came from. But it's pretty dope. I know that they're good friends. So "You're So Vain" is like a dark glaze cover song. It's another hit cover song for Manson. It just has a nice groove about it. This is kind of almost like a solid like rock dance song, something like that. I can definitely see this being played in like a nightclub or just a night venue in some sort of like kind of malaise kind of sense as far as that kind of goes. Just kind of typical Marilyn Manson, maybe not as emphatic as like the Sweet Dreams song, but definitely it competes with it. I feel like songs like Sweet Dreams, Personal Jesus, You're So Vain, some of these ones are just kind of, they continue that trend of having Marilyn Manson kind of do that dark sort of pitch, and this is just another example of kind of getting that. Just kind of takes like a cover song. I don't know the sheer snappiness of the original song, but I would have to say this is kind of like a dark, this is kind of just like a dark little jig of a song that just kind of has like some decent tempo about it, just for having a good groove about it. So I do like the concept of getting that one. And then Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms is kind of one of these ones I was talking about with the new shift for what Marilyn Manson kind of did on this album, which is just kind of some Nine Inch Nails like sludge. It's malaised. It's good for some malaised after hours, and it just feels like some after hours sleaze. This would have to say this is just a good concept. I mean, this really feels ripped out of 1993, which is the concept. That was when Marilyn Manson was coming up. I do like the concept of getting that one. But I do like the concept of getting some of these sludgy kind of Nine Inch Nails and Depeche Mode like tunes. But I would have to say if they were snappy, like Lay Down Your Goddamn Arms kind of was, which is just 4 minutes, 10 seconds, something like that, I would definitely say it'd be more. But you look after some of these, to talk about the complaints of this album, there just were some ones on here, like, yeah, me disliking 8 songs out of 14 on here. There's just a lot of ones. Like to talk about some of the songs I didn't enjoy, like a couple of these quick ones, like Breaking the Same Old Ground. That one kind of felt like a nursery type song, which I would have liked that if the production elements would have been better on that one, but it just didn't quite have the approach for how that needed to kind of happen. And I feel like Pistol Whip just didn't have a good beat composition. Some of these shorter and snappy songs that were less than 5 minutes, like 4 minutes, 15 seconds, some of those type ones just didn't really have like the correct pitch for what they needed to. Like the Gardener and Pistol Whip were just kind of uninteresting ones. They just took a while to start up and just had a lot going on that just didn't have like the proper arrangements. I was really looking for something from Marilyn Manson that just would have had that haunting kind of tinge. I really feel like Marilyn Manson needed more songs like You're So Vain. I mean, even though that was a cover song, they should have taken the beat composition and just the elements of how that production work on that song worked, and another song like No Reflection or even Slow Motion, and kind of done more songs like that. I just feel like Pistol Whipped and The Gardener were just kind of clumsy album cuts, and so was Breaking the Same Old Ground. And then to talk about some of these lengthier ones, like with Disengage, the thing about this album is it's not really that malaise. This is kind of more of a metal album, so it doesn't really do as many of those haunting kind of Korn, and I feel like this album is just not as malaise as like I was expecting. This one just doesn't have like the kind of leery kind of alternative metal feel as much as like things like Korn do and folks like that, and some other ones maybe like Mushroom Head or some of those type folks. This is a lot more of like a metal album, but I feel like the engagement for how these riffs kind of turn out, it just doesn't do it in as much of an interesting format. Like I kind of look after it, I would have expected some of these 5 minute songs to really kind of sprawl into some of that, but some of these are just more kind of lengthy to listen to. Like the shorter songs that were album cuts that didn't work that well were just kind of a disappointment, just because the riff work on these songs were just not that engaging. They just kind of felt clumsy, especially for Marilyn Manson when their usual track record is a lot higher in veneer than that. And then on top of that, like the 5 minute songs like Flowers of Evil, Children of Cain, Born Villain, some of these type ones. I don't know why this was not able to have a more concocted. Some of these lengthier songs by Marilyn Manson just didn't really have the engagement factor down that I would have liked them to. I just feel like definitely, I mean, normally I would say that Marilyn Manson can make a pretty haunting song, and some of these ones on here are good examples of it. Like, I at least almost like the composition and the beat on Born Villain, but this was not quite. The engagement factor of it was just not large enough to really have most of these be worth the listen. That's just kind of the problem. I just feel like it doesn't have like the same normal kind of addictiveness that a Manson album kind of typically has. Like some of the productions on here are just not quite, especially the lengthier songs, and there's even some shorter songs like Pistol Whipped and The Gardener that just don't really have like the same electricity that they probably needed to, which is just kind of somewhat of a disappointment. But I look after it, that kind of plagues over half this album. So in terms of what I'm going to score this album, me liking 6 songs out of 14 on this particular album, I'm going to give this album like a 4.75 out of 10. I would like to give it a higher score, and I almost would give it like a 5 or a 5.25 just based upon the fact of like liking the 4 singles or the 4 songs on this album that were promoted, but it's just going to get a 4.75 out of 10 just because it's kind of a lackluster Marilyn Manson album where it is a return to form, and it did get them back to like their early 2000s and late 90s kind of fanfare, but the execution of how it did it was just kind of poor considering how many songs that were just not hits. And I kind of look after it, like there are some good moments on here, but it just felt like the punches were kind of pulled, and it just felt like a slider kind of album that just didn't have the same venom. This is kind of just felt rather limp, half baked, and just not quite as biting as what it needed to. Marilyn Manson has personality for days, and usually he has more riffs that are just more ravenous than this, but there just were a severe lack of songs that really have that pungent kind of bite, and especially in like a Stepping Out sense, it just didn't really have like the viral songs are just not as contagious this time, or there's just not a lot of ravenous raucous kind of songs, and even the hangout songs just don't really have that same kind of context as far as that kind of goes. The raucous moments are kind of in short supply, and there's not an abundance of like nightclub and kind of stepping out moments, so it's just kind of a more trite album than what I was kind of expecting. I would have thought, I mean, I felt like this was a return to form, but it just didn't have like the sheer, it was kind of short-winded. I just would have to say that. So that's kind of the concept about it. But so me, the social score as a result, I'm going to give the social score like a 6.5. The social score I'm going to give a 6.5 out of 10 because I feel like this does have more social kind of gems on here, but it's just kind of in the concept that they're just light. I mean, the songs that are good, but it's just the fact that there's just not a ton of them. So it's just kind of where I think a lot of folks are going to say, oh, there's some good songs, but it just is not an all day and tomorrow kind of album. That's just kind of thing about it. But the personality is on fire on here, the aesthetics on fire. Some of the songs that do hit pretty well, but it's just kind of like I was saying, just kind of short-winded. So it gets a 6.5 out of 10. In terms of the future, like Marilyn Manson, it's been over 3 years since we've gotten a Marilyn Manson album. So it's been since 2020. The band, the particular Marilyn Manson, the man, has gone through a number of controversies with folks like Evan Rachel Wood and some folks like that. So there has been some cancel culture kind of vibes around Marilyn Manson. But hopefully we get some more albums. But this is definitely one that I would still recommend, despite me giving it like such a poor, mediocre kind of score. But it's just not a full blown kind of sheer home run kind of victory, but that's just kind of the concept where it's good, but it just is somewhat slight, I would have to say, or it's slight to a decent amount.